On BBC The Producers, another programme in our series featuring West Country industry. Tonight, Peter Brown takes a look at the Bridgwater film industry.
Darling, what's that funny smell?
Oh, it always smells like that when you get near Bridgwater.
Most days in the year, there's no escaping it, either on the M5 or across the fields in Bridgwater. No escaping it for 40 years, or seemingly wanting to.
There might have been a smell there, but by God, the money didn't smell. That's the main thing, and that's all that we work there for.
The smell is a byproduct of one of the West Country's biggest factories, the headquarters of British Cellophane Limited, which is part of the worldwide Courtaulds empire. It's on the northern edge of the town, nearly 60 acres of it, and what they make here is one of the most familiar ingredients of the consumer society. The supermarket is a symbol of our time. This one happens to be in Bristol. It could equally be Brussels or Brisbane, Buenos Aires or Birmingham, Alabama. Everywhere now, this is the way the housekeeping goes, on food that's branded, packaged, help yourself and pay at the checkout. And it's the packaging that makes it all possible. Without it, much of this would be unsaleable in 24 hours. What is fresh, crisp, sealed and protected just for you and yours would quickly become so much waste. Packaging to that extent helps both the housewife and the shopkeeper, even if it's a lot more impersonal than the old corner store. Wherever there's a loaded supermarket trolley, materials made in Somerset may well be part of the packaging, whether it's in the Americas, the Far East or even Russia. Housewives may be irritated, conservationists may complain about it, though one of cellophane's virtues is that it does gradually decay. It's biodegradable. But what the industry calls flexible film includes a lot of other materials, most of them made equally well by half a dozen other countries. And competing with all of them is one of the conditions of British Cellophane's survival.
Oh, Derek, having come back from the forest after 3 weeks, can you give us a quick
Sales conferences, an almost daily Bridgwater routine, have the same global ring to them as a meeting of OPEC. Derek Randall's sales territory takes in Eastern Europe and the Far East.
The strength of the market that we saw in the Far East earlier this year is somewhat stabilising, and there isn't the same film demand as was apparent, say, in the second quarter.
But what about the third and fourth quarter? And what's happening to Japanese cellophane in Singapore? Or the Americans in Venezuela? What's going to happen to the exchange rate for the pound by the time we get their money? And what's the inflation rate likely to be by Christmas?
In the Middle East, where you don't have American competition.
Do they put prices up? And by how much? And when? And what's going to happen in Jamaica or Hong Kong or Timbuktu if they do? Sometimes the answers come easily.
The area where this could only possibly be a kind of problem would be in Venezuela, I think, where traditionally, as you know, we do maintain a slightly lower price level in order to remain competitive with the Americans. But in the remainder of the South American and Latin American markets
Sometimes they can only sound vaguely optimistic.
Yes, but as far as Venezuela is concerned, after all, it is an oil-rich country. It has contributed to some extent to the situation in which we find ourselves. I'm sure that the customers...
But answers there have to be. BCL is the world's biggest single cellophane exporter and its second largest single manufacturer. Cellophane has two main ingredients, and one is wood pulp. That can be made out of just about any plant, although this comes from a sort of eucalyptus grown in southern Africa. It arrives in Britain looking like sheets of thick blotting paper. The other ingredient is caustic soda. The mixture of pulp and liquid is churned to a slurry, which goes on to receive a range of treatments whose timing, temperature and humidity are controlled as carefully as if the operation was run by a cordon bleu cook. Something very like cellophane was first made more than 80 years ago. The French were selling it before the First World War. Making it well is now a necessary obsession for anyone wanting to sell it at all. Control of the process at Bridgwater is meticulous and increasingly automatic. Not long ago, this man's job would have needed much more effort and a lot more people. The liquid that finally reaches the machine that makes the cellophane is viscose, made with cellulose crumbs carefully ripened like cheese. And it's here where the process begins that Bridgwater's smell is born. Essentially, this scent of cellophane is a simple and harmless compound of carbon and sulfur, which the human nose can detect in minute quantities with marvelous efficiency. The firm claims that you cannot make cellophane without it. By the time the film appears, it's moving at 70 meters a minute, more than 20 miles every 8-hour shift, making its way through an acid bath, a bleach, and almost boiling water. It gains strength as it runs the length of the machine to be softened in glycerin and oven-dried too, before it finally reaches the other end of the casting machine, 80 yards from its beginning. Making it happen so that the film emerges with the same constant quality is one of the tricks they've spent the last 40 years perfecting. Selling the stuff is sometimes more uncertain. Marketing director Alan Collinson.
For example, what happened in Iran, we were doing 1,000 tons into Iran and all of a sudden it was cut out overnight. The same thing happened in Turkey for financial reasons, and in fact we've got a large debt outstanding from Turkey which we don't expect to be settled for about 5 years, if at all. But that didn't hurt us too much because we're so widely spread in all markets across the world that we are able to balance one off against the other. And I think this is the key to BCL's export success, that we do have this diversity of markets, we have the diversity of products, diversity of customers.
But the customers have to be found and kept. There are 15 of these giant machines at Bridgwater. They operate night and day. Between them, they're capable of turning out 32,000 tons of cellophane a year. Every ton of film means another 1 million packets of crisps, or cigarettes, or biscuits, or some other use among hundreds already found for it. Every day's production can mean another 100 tons for which buyers must be found. As in just about every other industry, fewer and fewer people are needed in all this, though 3,000 of them still work at Bridgwater, about half the BCL group total. Cellophane is very far from being a single unchanging product. It can be coated and laminated, strengthened and moisture-proofed. Different climates demand different packaging. A sliced loaf needs a very different kind of protection in a Canadian winter than it does in the middle of an Indian monsoon. But world demand for cellophane is falling. It's losing ground to cheaper, often tougher materials, mainly oil-based. Yet instead of reducing their dependence on it, British Cellophane's managing director Ray Ashworth is fighting for an even larger share of this declining market.
Well, that's absolutely true. When cellophane peaked in the world about 4 or 5 years ago, it was about 600,000 tons consumption in the world. The pessimists, the worst pessimists, say it'll be 150,000 tons when it stops declining. And others, less pessimistic, say 250,000 tons.
Even so, BCL decided long ago not to be totally dependent on cellophane. They own this factory at Swindon making polypropylene, one of the packaging films made from oil. They bought it in 1969 at a time when the byproducts of cheap oil threatened to drive cellophane off the market completely. Today, the rising oil price is one obvious reason for still backing cellophane. Polypropylene is tougher than cellophane, That's important if you are packaging something like potato crisps. Their sharp edges can easily cut holes in a packet on a damp day, turning crisps into a soggy mess. Crisp makers were at one time one of the biggest single markets for cellophane. 10,000 tonnes of polypropylene a year are being turned out at Swindon by 200 people. That's about a third of the Bridgwater cellophane output. And cellulose remains the basis of the Courtauld Empire. At Bridgwater, they've got another way of using it. Bonded fibres, fabrics held together by cellulose rather than being woven like a textile material. It's a way of giving something like paper many of the characteristics of cloth. A capacity to absorb water without turning into pulp is one. Throwaway housecloths, nappy liners, and the moist face wipes that airlines hand out as a freshener after one of their plastic meals. They are all made at Bridgwater. So is the lining material for suits, one of the biggest uses for bonded fibres. British cellophane was badly needed when it first came to Bridgwater in 1937. Apart from local farming, the town was largely dependent on the brick and tile industry, and that was dying. For generations, Bridgwater tiles had been carried away down the River Parrett to roof the towns along the Severn estuary. Some even went as far as Newfoundland. Then Courtaulds came looking for a new factory site that offered water, a welcoming community, and a workforce familiar with shift work to make cellophane. The smell it made worried local people very little then or since.
Well, it's not too bad, really. You get used to it. And it's one of those things you have to live with.
I mean, you can smell it sometimes, but it doesn't bother me.
A younger generation has come to take for granted the factory that's always been part of their lives. But old men remember the place before cellophane came.
Bridgwater was a dead town before they came here. Absolutely clapped out. And cellophane brought a new lease of life to Bridgwater altogether.
The town needs British cellophane. A lot of men's jobs depend on that place to stay open. And I think they're very good to the men down there as to holiday pay and, you know, they're good. Once you get in there, you've got a good job.
The firm's production director, Jack Napthine, sees attempts to reduce the smell as part of an overall good neighbour policy.
We've willingly gone along in heavy capital expenditure programs. We pushed far less CS2 and H2S and chemicals out than we did.
All these things that do smell?
Yes, that's right. And indeed we have increased production, I suppose, 7 or 8-fold in the last 25 years. And I don't think the smell is any worse. So at least that contribution is there. But we have done our own investigations, but in the main we work with other people in trying to find the smell.
How far do you see it as part of your job to be a good neighbour in the community? Or is it just enough to hand out the wages, keep the place going and pay your rates?
Well, no, of course it's not enough just to do that. I think our biggest contribution must be in maintaining a high level of investment and a high level of activity in the company to continue to employ as many of the people as we can in Bridgwater and the districts.
But do you help the community outside that? Do you help organisations and so on in Bridgwater?
I think we see ourselves really that the total community has, I think, to be happier than just the working environment. We help perhaps the homes for elderly people. If we think that we can help them in some way with equipment or doing something for them, then we'll try and do that. And indeed, if one of the sporting clubs found themselves a cricket club on a sticky wicket, well, we'd help them out.
One result of this identification with the local community is the Works Sports and Social Club. It's big, lavishly equipped and well used, at least by the process workers and their families.
That's coming to a nice home.
But it's not a place where senior management is seen very often. The sense of us and them that is common to much of British industry is part of British Cellophane too, and it lingers here, off duty. The impression offered is that British Cellophane is good for the town, but the firm as an employer is no better than it should be, or its social club.
But it's a cheap point, cheaper than the pubs.
You've got cricket, squash, football, you know. There's a lot of interdepartmental, sort of competitions going on all the time, you know. So you just put your name down, 20 pence, you know, for a night out, and you come down here.
Do you think on the whole that British Cellophane's a good employer?
It's about the best around here.
Yeah, but that's because it's the biggest, isn't it?
Cellophane probably offers you a bit of security and excellent sports and social facilities. If a man doesn't want more than that, then he's all right in Cellophane.
As long as you can put up with the shift work, it's as good a job as I know. In the process, you know, I've no training for anything else. You know, you just gotta take what's about.
And what's about is making flexible film. Not just cellophane and polypropylene, but in another part of the Bridgwater works, polythene too. What they are doing is one of the few parts of the polythene making process which involves much skill. Hot polythene is being blown from a giant ring in the floor to form a bubble which will stretch to the roof. Once the bubble is formed, its walls will go on moving upwards largely automatically at 18 feet a minute for as long as the raw material is fed in at the other end. Polythene also comes from oil. Theoretically, it can be made by anyone with £25,000 and a good garden shed, but not of this quality. British Cellophane, unwilling to be left out of any part of the packaging film industry, have 27 machines making polythene at Bridgwater. This is the biggest. It's a cheap plastic, absolutely unaffected by water, but it deteriorates if it's exposed to light for a long time. BCL this year will make over 100,000 tonnes of film of all kinds. There are factories in the north of England, the United States and Canada, all controlled from the Bridgwater headquarters. In each of them, the process is becoming more and more automated, less dependent on human skill. There's no escaping the growing boredom of men who must spend most of their time watching a machine. Shift foreman Geordie Adamson sees it as everyone's problem.
This is in general throughout industry, isn't it? And we try to offset this by moving the men around on their sections, different machines, so they have a different type of environment each day. And then also there's jobs going on the plant, rewinding, film sorting, etc., which we put them on. And this is in order to try and obtain job satisfaction and keep the men happy and not get into a rut, which they would definitely get if they were just stuck on one machine day after day, week after week.
In the cellophane plant, men also move from job to job in the same way, but that still leaves some with little to do except change one finished reel and start another. Unless somewhere along the line, the cellophane breaks. Then skills and teamwork sharpened by years of practice are applied to the business of finding the break, ripping the damaged film from the machine and threading it again through a maze of rollers to restart production. Growing automation not only means fewer men, it can mean that those left with a job may be there mainly to cope with emergencies, in this case about once a shift. Breakdown, even in industrial relations, can almost be a welcome relief. In 1977, a pay row led to a go slow, then what the process workers called a lockout. They were out for a week. Their negotiator, Cliff Fursland, handling the worst breakdown in the firm's 40 years, argued his case on the local rugby ground.
They came back with one proposal only, that we do 75 men on the site. Now let's get this right in the company's letter, there be no redundancy and whatnot. That will be 75 jobs gone, whether we like it or not, for Bridgwater, for all time.
Is there still bad feeling about that?
There's terrible bad anger about that situation now, and this leads on to the fact, a company can't communicate or in that way they'd like to. This is one of the reasons why it's still bitter. Our people are bitter about that lockout. Our union made this official, don't forget, and there's reactions to it even today.
Are communications bad within the company?
There are communications from the company, particularly at my level, obviously. There's communications at the shop floor.
Do they tell you all you'd like to know?
We do press the company, they do tell us what we want to know, that's quite true. But when they communicate with the labour force on the shop floor through notice boards, some say they don't read notices, or they must read the notices, but whether they believe what's on the notice is another matter. We got a long history, certainly before wage reviews, for instance, of the company putting up notices of the state of the company and everything like this. People got immune to that kind of thing now. They don't take much notice.
Persuading the shop floor is a problem. Managing Director Ray Ashworth needs no convincing of that.
We put over an absolutely frank and open picture of what we have achieved, why we've achieved it, how we've failed to achieve it, and so on. And we do this to all kinds of levels, to trades union representatives, to their full-time officials, to foremen, to managers, and we ask for dissemination. But I believe it is very difficult on a shift system for that information to percolate right down through the system to a man working on one of the operations. We'd love to find a better way of doing it, short of writing them a quarterly letter each, in which case one might be crossing some other lines of communication that are not within our province. We can't think of a better way of doing it other than wearing away at the problem by thinking of new ways of passing information on.
Of course, there is a problem of them believing you, isn't there? A real sort of credibility gap, yes. A sense that you've cried wolf, perhaps, in the past.
Yes, I'm sure I agree with that statement. There has been a credibility gap, which we have tried very hard for a very long time to wear down, and it's rather like water on a stone. We work hard at it, we are utterly frank, open, invite questions, invite contact with other unions who know about the accounts and the costs and the prices and so on, to be exposed fully so that our credibility can be maintained.
But a union official has told us that, in a sense, his chaps aren't interested. They come here to work, they got their mortgages and their families to worry about, and they're not really interested in what's happening to cellophane in North America or France. That is a problem, isn't it?
It is a problem, and one that we would very much like to overcome, because interest in the job and interest in the monthly, quarterly, annual achievement are vital if this boredom effect of industry is going to be overcome.
British Cellophane looks better at making and marketing its products than it is in explaining to its workforce what it's up to and why. Yet only twice in 40 years has it had anything that could be called a strike, and there's never been any redundancy. It goes on improving what it makes. Its research department is the West Country's biggest outside aerospace. It's working hard to establish itself in the United States, under the very nose of its biggest competitor. Here's a British company operating in a world league and determined to stay up among the leaders. Most of its effort goes into giving its customers around the world what they think they need and making sure that they get it when they want it. There's even a department to design better packaging. That way a customer can be helped to sell more of whatever he's making, whether it's Scottish shortbread, frozen chips in Texas, or potato crisps almost anywhere. And it boosts the sales of packaging film at the same time. Most of the Bridgwater film goes to so-called converters who colour and print it. British Cellophane has subsidiaries among them too. Yet clearly a lot of things could go wrong. An embargo on South African trade, a dramatic further increase in the oil price, a continuously overvalued pound. John Chinnerworth, an economist in charge of marketing services, wouldn't welcome any of them.
Well, any one of those three would be bad for us, and of course many of them are outside our control as a company. Things I worry about are things which we can control as a company. I think one of the things we could control, which we do control, but which could go wrong, is if we let our productivity slip relative to that of our overseas competitors.
Isn't it already lower than a lot of your overseas competitors?
No, I don't think it is, but I think that their productivity is going up. They've been forced to get theirs up because when a firm is losing money, unlike British Cellophane, which has consistently made money, when a firm is losing money, there's enormous pressure to cut their costs, to increase their productivity, to get their workforce lower in numbers, and we have not yet had that pressure, and I hope we shall avoid having it. We should get our productivity up before we are forced to do so.
You think British Cellophane is doing pretty well?
Yes, I do. I think with our consistent profit record and our high level of exports, we are doing pretty well. And if the rest of British industry consistently made money and exported as we did, a lot of the country's economic problems would be very much less serious than they are.
British Cellophane, then, is equipped to survive. It works harder and more successfully than any of its competitors at exporting what it makes. It spends the equivalent of £6 million a year on new equipment. It manages to look like a good employer in Britain while keeping its labour costs low by world standards. Ray Ashworth has his worries, but he's confident too.
I think if one tried to cross all the bridges before we came to them, you wouldn't sleep at nights. All we can say is that we believe we're built on a very solid foundation, that we're better than the competition, and that if there is going to be a survivor, it's going to be us.
Bridgwater must hope that he's right, and the rest of us too, perhaps.
BBC One.